The old clock above the grand fireplace ticked away the last moments of the quiet evening. In the small, dimly lit study, young Timothy sat hunched over a dusty book, his nose buried in its yellowed pages. His mother had told him not to go into that room, but curiosity had always been his downfall. "What's so interesting?" Tim's sister, Rachel, poked her head through the door, her curiosity piqued by his unusual behavior. Tim looked up, startled, and quickly slammed the book shut. Rachel stepped in, her eyes wide with excitement. "You're not reading one of those ghost stories again, are you?" Tim shrugged nonchalantly, trying to play it cool. "It's just a book," he said, pushing it aside. Rachel rolled her eyes. "You know Mom says they're not good for you." She leaned against the doorframe, her arms folded. "But if you're not going to tell me, I'll just go back to watching TV." The book was an ancient tome, bound in leather that was brittle with age. It had been hidden in the attic for as long as Tim could remember, but he had stumbled upon it during one of his many explorations of the old house. It spoke of a ghost that haunted these very halls, a spirit seeking vengeance for a wrong long forgotten. Tim's curiosity had been stirred by the whispers of the townsfolk and the eerie silence that sometimes filled the corridors of their family home. Rachel, on the other hand, was a skeptic. But tonight something felt different. The air was thick with an unspoken tension that seemed to hang like a heavy fog, pressing down on the two siblings. "You're not scared, are you?" Rachel teased, her voice light and playful. But Tim couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had felt it before, a prickle at the back of his neck, the way his skin seemed to tighten like a drumhead before a storm. "I'm not," he lied, hoping his voice didn't betray him. The house was old, filled with creaks and groans that seemed to come alive after dark. Rachel's laughter echoed through the room as she turned to leave, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Tim waited until he heard the distant sound of the TV before he reached for the book again. The pages crackled as he opened it to where he had left off, his eyes scanning the faded text, eager for answers to the strange occurrences that had been plaguing him. The silence was suddenly shattered by a chilling wail, a sound so haunting it seemed to freeze the very air around him. Tim's heart skipped a beat. Rachel's laughter was gone, replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to stretch on forever. He knew then that the stories were true, and the ghost was closer than he ever dared to believe. He tried to stand, but his legs trembled beneath him, refusing to move. The candle flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the room that danced like silent sentinels. With a deep breath, he managed to push himself upright, the book sliding off the desk with a thud that seemed to echo through the house. He took a cautious step toward the door, his hand reaching out to grasp the doorknob. As he turned it, the room grew cold, and the door swung open with an eerie creak. He stepped into the hallway, the darkness seeming to swallow him whole. The flickering lights from the candle barely pierced the gloom, throwing grotesque shadows along the wallpaper. His breath came in shallow gasps, and he could feel the presence of something unseen, something malevolent, watching him from the shadows. With the book clutched tightly to his chest, Tim tiptoed through the hall, the whispers of the old house seeming to grow louder with each step he took. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for any sign of Rachel or the ghost he feared was stalking him. The stairs loomed ahead, each step groaning like an old man's protest. He knew he had to find her, had to warn her about the spirit that lurked within their home. The wail grew louder, resonating through the house like a mournful cry for help. Tim's legs propelled him forward, driven by fear and adrenaline. As he reached the top of the stairs, a cold hand brushed against his cheek, sending a shiver down his spine. He whipped around, but there was nothing there, only the lingering chill and the feeling of being watched. The door to Rachel's room stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the dark hallway. He pushed it open, the TV flickering a strobe of blue across the walls. Rachel sat in bed, her eyes wide with terror, clutching her blankets to her chin. "Tim," she whimpered, relief washing over her face. "I heard it too." The siblings shared a moment of understanding, their skepticism forgotten. The house was alive with the unrest of the supernatural, and they were in its thrall. They knew they had to find a way to lay the vengeful spirit to rest before it was too late. But as they sat huddled together, the wail grew fainter, retreating back into the depths of the house. The question remained, what would the ghost do next, and how could they possibly prepare for the horrors that were to come? They decided to confront the ghost together, each holding onto the other's hand for comfort and courage. They ventured deeper into the house, the coldness of the floorboards seeping through their socks as they stepped over the threshold into the uncharted territory of the darkened hallway. The air grew colder, and the shadows grew denser, seemingly thickening into a palpable presence that surrounded them. Tim's eyes darted around, searching for any clue as to where the ghost might be hiding. Rachel clutched the book tightly, her thumb tracing the edges of the pages as if seeking protection from its ancient knowledge. They approached the room at the end of the corridor, the one that had been sealed off since before they were born. It was said to hold the secrets of their ancestry, secrets that had been buried along with the ghost's grief. The door was heavy, and it took all their combined strength to push it open. It creaked in protest, revealing a chamber that had not seen the light of day in decades. Dust danced in the beam of Tim's flashlight, illuminating a space filled with cobwebs and the stale scent of time forgotten. In the center of the room, a portrait of a stern-faced ancestor watched over them with an eerie gaze that seemed to follow their every move. The siblings stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The flashlight cast shadows that grew and shrank with each step, playing tricks on their eyes. They could feel the ghost's presence growing stronger, a pressure building in the air around them, making it difficult to breathe. Rachel's grip on Tim's hand tightened as they moved closer to the portrait, the source of the malevolent energy that filled the space. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging them into complete darkness. Rachel's scream pierced the silence, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the room. Tim felt a hand clamp over his mouth, cold and unyielding, the same chilling touch that had brushed his cheek earlier. The ghost had found them, and there was no turning back now. Panic surged through him, and he struggled to break free. Rachel's hand was trembling in his, her nails digging into his palm. He could feel the warmth of her tears on his skin, and he knew she was just as terrified. But fear wasn't going to save them, they had to act. With a surge of strength, Tim managed to tear the hand away from his mouth, and together they bolted towards the door, their hearts hammering in their chests like trapped animals. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off their escape. They were trapped in the room with the ghost, the air thick with its icy rage. Rachel began to recite the incantation she had found in the book, her voice shaking but determined. The words were archaic and strange, a language long forgotten by the living, yet the very air seemed to tremble with the power of her voice. As Rachel spoke, the portrait's eyes began to glow with a faint blue light, the spirit within the frame seeming to come to life. The ghostly pressure grew stronger, pushing against them, threatening to crush them. Tim could feel it in his very bones, a cold so intense it burned. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening until they felt as if they were standing in the heart of a freezer. The incantation reached its crescendo, and Rachel's voice grew strong and clear. A brilliant light filled the room, and the ghostly presence recoiled, shrieking in rage. The siblings shielded their eyes, and when they dared to look again, the portrait was gone, leaving only a gaping hole in the wall where it had once hung. The cold dissipated, and the shadows retreated into the corners of the room. They had done it, or so they thought. The house was silent once more, but the tension remained, a coiled spring waiting to snap. The siblings stumbled out of the room, their hearts still racing. They knew that this was just the beginning. The ghost had not disappeared, it had only retreated, biding its time. They had disturbed its slumber, and now they were part of its twisted tale. The real battle was yet to come. The night grew longer, and the shadows grew bolder, stretching out from the corners of their eyes, whispering threats in their ears. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed to be the ghost's taunts, reminding them of its presence. They decided to stay in Rachel's room, the most well-lit and least haunted area of the house. But even there, the whispers followed them, the cold touch brushing against their skin like a constant reminder of what lurked beyond the door. As dawn approached, the whispers grew quieter, the cold retreating with the first light of day. But Tim and Rachel knew that the ghost was not gone, it was only waiting for the moment when they would let their guard down. They had uncovered a dark secret that had been buried for generations, and now they had to live with the consequences. The house was no longer a home. It was a prison for the living, and a playground for the dead. The siblings huddled together, planning their next move. They knew they couldn't just ignore the spirit forever. They had to find a way to lay it to rest, to free themselves from the fear that had taken root in their hearts. The book held the key, they were sure of it. But what price would they have to pay to unlock the secrets within its pages? And would they ever truly be able to escape the haunting echoes of the ghost's vengeful wail? The story of the vengeful ghost of Holloway House had only just begun, and the siblings were about to become its newest, most unwilling characters. They had disturbed a sleeping giant, and now they had to find a way to survive its wrath. But the question remained, what really happened in the hallowed halls of their ancestral home? And would they ever uncover the truth before it was too late? The answers lay within the pages of the dusty tome, and as the sun began to rise, they knew that they had no choice but to continue reading, to delve deeper into the chilling history that haunted their every waking moment.